With the recent No Way Home pack, I was questioning whether or not other companies aside from Marvel Legends should make Spider-Man figures. Is Mafex one of the definitive ones? To answer that question, I went and purchased Mafex Classic Spider-Man. Now, to be specific, because I know that there's two variants out there, this is Mafex number 185. And it's funny because I just love the aesthetic of this box. It's very compact while at the same time hearkening to where basically this version of Spidey comes from, which is the comics. This is probably one of the more comic accurate versions of Spidey you're going to come across in figure form that is, again, not Marvel Legends. And it's funny because Mafex probably got so full of themselves, figuratively speaking, that they made two. And technically, this is, I guess you could say, the more budget-friendly version. There's another version out there that is so rare that's going for a whopping like $150, $170, and that's the one that comes with the alternate head, some additional accessories. This is kind of a revamped version, and even the box itself is kind of self-aware with a little image there in the corner of Spidey hanging upside down, and it says "Double Trouble." So it's almost like it's Spidey having a little bit of a meta Deadpool moment there, saying, oh, we're doing this again, we're having another iteration, and that's pretty much what this version is. And again, it's one of the more affordable ones, so this is the one that effectively I pulled the trigger on. Before we move on, quick shout out to Mafex. When you remove the figure out of the box, you actually have a nice comic looking diorama of New York City in the background inside of the box. I kind of wish that you'd be able to take it out, but to do so you would literally have to cut open the box. I don't want to damage it, so I wish that was its own separate piece, but it's a nice little detail. Once you get him out though, here he is, the Mafex 6-inch version of classic Spidey. And I'll admit, I was a little nervous. I was a little disappointed amongst figuring out exactly how this guy is necessarily the comics version, because you'll notice that he's looking a little pudgy around this area. That was probably one of the few things that set off a bit of a Metal Gear Solid alarm in my head when taking him out of the box, because within the window, I thought to myself, yeah, you got some pretty decent paint work and some really faithful adaptations of the source material bringing forward that comic accurate Spidey. But once I took a closer look at those legs, and most especially the diaper piece here, he was looking a little hefty, a little pudgy, almost like he went to town on leg day, but he failed to really recognize the rest of his body and really get into shape for the majority of the rest of the workout week. And because of that, yeah, there are some proportional issues with this Mafex, which is a bummer because up until this point, Mafex has been doing a pretty good job of having the quality behind their figures speak for themselves, especially the most recent Mafex Hush Batman that I got myself. That, to me, is actually one of the more definitive comic accurate Batman figures that I have in my collection, that taking outside of the equation McFarlane or any of those general staple figure companies that you would expect to walk into brick and mortar stores and just pick up their figures. Here, however, I'll say that in a neutral position, specifically neutral, there's something a little off about the proportioning within the body sculpt of this Spidey. You'll notice that the top half is a little bit on the leaner side than it is the bottom, or at least within the majority area of this blue segment, almost as if maybe a secondary party was in charge of designing this overall bit. Once you get to the legs, we start to thin down again, and therefore, like I said, in a neutral position, if you were to just be standing here in the shelf or up on some kind of display, he would not necessarily be a conversation starter, because there's just something so off about these proportions that thinks to myself, maybe I should have shelved the extra money for that original version. Maybe it was that original version why it's so sought after, and apart from the additional accessories of having a unmasked head and all the other little web accessories, etc., it probably had a much more faithful portrayal. And so their second time around right here, at least, again, in a very neutral stance, it's not exactly favoring all that well. Proportions aside though, there is some heft to the plastic. Taking him out of the box and then finally feeling him in hand, you can definitely see where the quality and where those bucks that you paid for necessarily went as far as the figure. He has this very rustic feel and rustic look that feels very much lifted from the comics from a visual standpoint. The red and blue really pops. You have an awful lot of the lining that's actually baked into the figure. It's not just a painted on web pattern, but you actually have the etchings of the web imbued into the plastic itself. Something that I desperately think Marvel Legends should take into consideration. Of course, you have the little spider symbol, very minimalistic there on his chest, but it looks very effective, as well as the very girthy one, the very girthy red one on his back. So overall, you definitely have a legitimate classic suit It's just that the proportions are just a little weird, especially when you take into consideration how much wider this area is versus the lats on his back right here that are supposed to be a bit more muscular defined. But when you have such a pudgy section here within the diaper area, it just kind of threw me off. There was just something about the look that it just had me at odds with myself, because I'm loving the actual work that went into the costume, specifically the head sculpt here, because again, it retains this really rustic look where you have the webbing kind of looking a little weathered and tattered, but then you have the really large lenses that are very comic accurate, have this kind of angular, slightly Todd McFarlane infused look to the lenses that have, you know, little touches that pay homage to his design, while at the same time still retaining some of those comic accurate looks. You know, he doesn't have the muted blue, he doesn't have the very angular body like he did in those classic cover arts that Todd McFarlane designed himself. So there's an awful lot of inspiration happening here, and for the most part, I result in being kind of conflicted due to how well the costume is portrayed, but the body really isn't. However, one of the things that I was really gushing about when I was covering that Mafex Hush Batman was the articulation. Not necessarily the points, because it doesn't really differentiate from some other staple companies like Marvel Legends or McFarlane, but it's the quality of those joints that really spoke to me. You're gonna have not one but two joints at the head, one at the top of the neck and one at the bottom, that allow full rotation 360, as well as really good inclination towards the inside and towards the back. So you're able to really get the head to nod and tilt from side to side and flush very well and be able to look in virtually every single direction. Then we get to the top arms, where not only you have a ball joint that is able to rotate vertically 360 degrees, but also extend towards the sides pretty generously. Actually, it extends beyond even the 180 degrees, so you're able to get the arms lifted almost at that angle like so that's pretty awesome. But of course, if you couldn't already tell, there is in fact another butterfly joint baked into the shoulder that's able to shrug the shoulder pretty much from front to back and vice versa, so that's pretty good mobility there. And for a character, I would even argue that more so than Batman, Spider-Man definitely needs something like this. Of course, some of the more traditional joints are going to be here. The bicep is able to swivel in place 360 degrees very fluidly. Two joints at the elbows, similar to that of the Mafex Batman. They feel very flush and very good in hand. Again, it's very difficult to interpret on screen, but there's something about the movement that feels very quality. It feels snug and tight, while at the same time, not like I'm going to break the figure. It actually feels like a very premium quality joint that's built into the figure itself. Of course, the wrists are able to rotate in place 360, as well as being able to kind of part midways to give you that little inclination inwards and outwards. And my reservations about the diaper aside, you do have two joints in the torso, one in the mid-torso cut that is able to horizontally nudge from left to right. I don't know, I could argue that you could rotated the full 360, but I do start to get a little resistance because of the way that this overall torso piece is built, so be careful. However, you are able to slightly crunch towards the front like so and extend towards the back pretty fully. And then of course you have the waist that is able to not only rotate slightly in place, but also be able to crunch and extend towards the back much more, so you're able to get much more range of mobility happening there. Same thing could be said about the obliques. Of course, those are not completely cut out. You can also rotate them and extend them in those directions as well. And again, for a character like Spidey, that needs to happen. Then you get the top leg joints. Not only can they move towards the front and extend the leg towards the front pretty fully, like you see right there, but also extend towards the back. And if you couldn't already tell, doing so will actually make the joint, and I've seen this not only happen with Mafex Batman, but also a couple of other Marvel Legends that genuinely surprised me. I believe Renew Your Vows Spidey had this thing right here, and I've seen some other people call this out, which is pretty cool, that it does have a bit of a swivel, I don't want to say swivel, but kind of like a quote-unquote shrugging motion happening within the rods that connect the legs here. So you're able to technically extend and shrug down the thighs right there, so that you're able to extend the leg towards the sides, but also just simply get the joint moving. And some people have said that, yeah, of course, to get the leg to extend, you need that shrugging motion to happen. But frankly, not every single company out there goes out of the way to include this shrugging motion even within their legs. And again, I'd argue that out of all the characters to do it with, Spidey is quintessential. I mean, McFarlane, I'm sorry, as much as I love McFarlane, they don't do this. You can extend their legs, but they don't nudge in any kind of direction like this. So this is pretty cool and pretty appreciated. Sadly, no kind of boot cuts or thigh swivels of any kind, but you do get the 2 joints at the knees that are fully able to bend all the way up, and they feel just as good as the elbow. And similar to that of the wrist, you do have some ball joints here at the ankle that are able to make the ankle bend all the way down. However, do be careful because as you can note right there, the joint is actually a little bit on the, I don't want to say loose side, but the rod that connects to the foot is a little on the delicate side. So bending the ankle down does cause some, I don't want to say issues, but is prone to loosening the ankle and then having the foot removed completely. A little bit of foreshadowing there, but you are able to bend the foot downwards and then bend it upwards like so, about that far, and slightly rotate it in place. Just do be careful with this little tab that is on the outside portion of the ankle that is, I would argue, is designed to cover it up and to make it much more natural looking, but to be honest, it looks a bit more unnatural. I would rather just have the ball joint be there so that I'm able to fully rotate the ankle in place. But you are able to slightly pivot it inwards and outwards, and you also get toesies with the boots right here, so you are able to bend the toes upwards slightly on this Mafex. So you see that the track record for Mafex delivering on some pretty essential and premium feeling articulation, even though they don't do anything to increase the number of joints and compromise the plastic and compromise the posability of the figure, you are getting some quality articulation here. And what really helps is that the articulation does a good job of kind of masking my issues with the diaper and the proportions of the figure, because when I started to play around with him and actually get him into some web swinging poses or some dynamic action poses, like he's flying midair, about to web up an enemy or do something like this, that's when I noticed that the diaper and this overall girth within the diaper and leg area started to kind of disappear and blend a little bit better with the rest of the body anatomy, so to speak. And as such, he started to look a little bit much more natural. So say, for example, if he's in this kind of flying pose about to web up a character or an enemy, he definitely looks a lot better than he did pulling him out of the box. Now, if you do want to help out with these poses, of course, you're going to have to, spoiler alert, rely on the accessories, which I've kind of already demonstrated by the removal of his foot. Of course, the hands can be swapped out. He comes with the default fisted hands, but of course, Mafex decided to not only throw in extra hands, but include these little pieces of plastic to hold them in place and have them paired so that you're not able to lose them very easily. So that is very, very much appreciated. You're going to come with, of course, a set of web shooting hands, a set of web holding hands, or thumbs up hands if you want to call them that, a set of open relaxed hands, and then a set of open stretched out wall crawling hands. The only little nitpick I will throw in here is that the digits are a little on the very pointy side. There's something kind of funny looking about his fingers that just looks so pointy, almost like he's got the nails protruding through them. So the sculpting on those could have been a little better, but at least the overall inclusion of the hands and the ease of access to swapping them out is pretty recommendable and pretty appreciated, like I mentioned before. Now, you'll notice that his feet, his boots, also came off during the process of the articulation phase, and that's because Mafex threw in another pair of shoes. Now, why is it that they threw in another pair? Well, that's because this specific pair comes with magnets on the underside. So that naturally gave me a knee-jerk reaction to go through the entirety of the hands that they threw in and discover that, yeah, they threw in an open set of wall-crawling hands with magnets inside, which means that they actually threw in very essential accessories to speak to the character. And that's what made me realize that that's the demographic, or that's the niche that Mafex always tries to go for, which is to make figures and make accessories for those figures that aren't must-haves, but they speak to a specific group of people that like that they are very considerate in this way. For a character like Batman, they're going to go out of their way to throw in an assortment of gadgets. For a character like Spider-Man, he's got to come with some magnetized feet and shoes so that he can stick to magnetized surfaces to make it look like he's wall crawling. It's a nice little touch, albeit it's a very small one, but it speaks to the character, and it just kind of makes you feel appreciated by spending this amount of money on a classic looking figure like this, especially when you know that you have other options like Marvel Legends to go, even if it's cheaper, but then they barely throw in the accessories. They barely throw in the hands. They're barely that considerate. And if that wasn't enough, The hands and the shoes aren't the only things that you can swap out. You can actually swap out the head for his alternate headpiece. Now, it's not exactly the most diverse one. I mean, it definitely pales in comparison to the additional head accessories that came with the prior iteration, especially with that unmasked Peter Parker head sculpt. But at least this one does come with a edgier, much angrier, or much better focused head sculpt here, with the lenses looking a little bit more narrow to make him either look more angry or more focused or much more action prone. So it's cool that you do have these two options right here. So if you want to make him look like he's webbing up an enemy or in the middle of a fight, you could do so. And there you would have him. Now, of course, it wouldn't be a Spidey figure without web strand accessories, and he comes with the traditional ones that you'd come to expect, that not only are pretty solidly built, but they also have the little hoops there at one end so that you're able to put them in between the hands so you can pose them with them. But of course, it's going to naturally come with two very short ones, two really long ones, and then one L-shaped one to make it look like he's mid-swing, so he's holding onto it. And again, they're pretty solidly built. They're actually completely solidly colored in white to, again, retain that kind of comic accurate look, so they're not going to be translucent like in the movies. And they're pretty decent, albeit a couple of them did come a little warped, so they're not necessarily my favorites, but they're still appreciated to be thrown in. He also comes with this web strand with a little web spray at the end of it. However, there's no loop on it, so I can't really attach it to any of his hands. And there's this little cylindrical piece at the end with a little hole in the middle. Don't know if it's supposed to attach to Spidey or to an enemy figure. If you guys have any information on this, let me know. And they work better when they're working with the hand gestures as opposed to just by themselves. Right now, for the sake of time, I'm just not going to apply them right here. But you can see right here that overall, he looks badass just as much with them as without him. And being that this is in fact Mafex, of course, they're not going to spare any expense. Mafex also threw in a translucent, small little display base right here with the articulated arm. It's not exactly the best, you know, a little bit of the quality of plastic and the looseness of some of the joints is left to be desired, so to speak, but at least they threw in an assortment of different kind of grabs, different kind of claws to hold the waist as well as the crotch, even this little separated rod in case you just want to display them. Again, in a neutral pose, though, I advise against it because it just makes the diaper and the proportions look all that much more obvious. Once you get them into a web swinging or web shooting pose, kind of like this, that's truly where this figure shines even better. And to be quite honest, we're in a different time set where Marvel Legends is cutting back on the accessories, cutting back on the quality, and you sometimes do need to turn to these other parties like Mafex/Medicom, Figuarts, Sentinel. That's really where you can feel an awful lot more of your hard-earned dollars go into much better accessories, much better quality of the articulation, even if they're not hitting much more points than before. And that's how I ended up being able to shove my reservations about the proportions off to the side as I explored the figure, played with it more, learned how to apply the accessories for the betterment of the poses, futz with the display stand despite the actual quality of it, and then actually looking at some of the number of accessories from the magnetized shoes and hands to the alternate head. Sure, again, it pales in comparison to the original version that came with many more accessories, but as far as what your options are considered right now, this is ultimately one of the better showings from Mafex. It's not one of their better figures, it's not one of the best versions of the classic suit out there, and maybe it may not be the most essential to get into your collection right away, but there's a specific niche that Mafex is able to tackle, focus on, and really nail. And I'm thankful that I'm able to be part of that demographic to consider the Mafex 185 Classic Suit Spidey a pretty decent 8 out of 10. It may not be for every single collector out there, but when it's able to hit, it truly does hit. And if you do happen to be amongst that demographic that likes these kind of niche Spider-Man figures, and you find this piece alluring, there are going to be affiliate links in the description below that you can utilize to get your own Mafex Classic Suit Spidey, and it helps out the channel in the process. Otherwise, if you have already kickstarted your own Mafex collection, let me know in the comments, guys, what are your guys' favorite additions to that Mafex collection, whether they be Batman related, Spider-Man related, or they're completely unrelated to either of those characters. What are your guys' holy grails as far as Mafex figures? Let me know in the comments. If you guys enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button, and as always, stay humble. I'll see you guys later. Take care.